of age 3 to 22 and keeping on afterwards, post high school career.
All right, we're ready to get started, and I failed to mention at the beginning that we will be recording this, not only as a live streaming now, but for future trainings. We had just asked for that courtesy that you silence your cell phones and whatever personal devices you may have with you. We appreciate that. Thank you. So as we start with transition, the very first foundational question to answer is, what is transition? So if we were to look in a dictionary, we might see a definition that transition is the passage from one state, stage, subject, or place to another. Therefore, the word represents change. Everybody goes through transition periods. As adults, we might transition from one community to another. We might transition from one job to another. Our children also transition throughout their development. There will be multiple transition periods typically during your child's school career. As you know, on their entry to elementary school, transitioning from elementary to the middle school years, to high school, even within the school setting from high school into their transition program, and then finally to their post-secondary setting. So we're going to touch briefly on all these different transitions and what it might look like for your child. So let's look first at the law, because that drives what schools will provide for your child and their students. You might have heard the term IDEA 2004. That acronym stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. And as you're probably aware, there are a lot of acronyms. So as you hear IDEA, that's referred to the foundational law, which requires all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So that is a mouthful, but it is showing that they focus on the child as a whole. The second paragraph.
He was very adamant that he could help, though I was skeptical. And another at home after we had gotten him into bed. As he slept during the postictal period, I laid next to him and held him, and I cried. This is only going to get harder. We love our son, but caring for him is physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting. Even with help from family and waiver services, we struggle to care for him. I want to be able to give him what he needs, but I can only do so much.
It will be all of the IEP meetings, assessments, the related personnel, administrators, and those working together for your child. So, transition is referring to a change in status, as we've mentioned. The most formal and final stage in a youth with special needs is the transition from behaving primarily as a student to assuming
limits. My heart breaks. He's only 8 years old.
Adult roles in the community. These roles are varied and include employment, participating in post-secondary education, maintaining or participating in the home environment, becoming appropriately involved in the community, and experiencing satisfactory personal and social relationships. And we know that within the Phelan-McDermid syndrome, there's a wide spectrum on capabilities. But again, we want to make each family aware that it's important to touch on all of these areas, and especially the personal and social relationships.
Of an orchestra, the role of a parent of a special needs child involves timing, organization, practice, love, and patience. Instead of brass, percussion, strings, and woodwinds, we have doctors, therapists, schools, medications, IEP meetings, dietary restrictions, behavioral issues, safety concerns, and various emergencies. Hi, my name is Amy. When I look back at the placement of Jacob into a group home 3.5 years ago, I see all of the different people in his life working together with each other in harmony to a beautiful symphony of Jacob's progress. The beautiful sound is Jacob's health, happiness, well-being, stability, his major improvement,
Full extent of their capability.
overwhelmed, and angry. Jacob was diagnosed with autism at age 3. He was diagnosed with PMS at 6. He has a history of blood and heart problems, hemolytic anemia, supraventricular tachycardia, A1 alpha antitrypsin deficiency, which can cause liver and lung disease, asthma, hypotonia, and like most of our kids is nonverbal, ADHD with sleep disorder. Like many of you, I've been to the emergency room many times, been to hundreds of therapy appointments, and dozens of specialists. Like many of you, I felt the complete frustration with the healthcare system. And we know the usual response when we tell a new doctor that our kid has PMS. The almost predictable response is, I'm not familiar with that syndrome. As I experienced the challenge of Jacob's conditions and tried to understand his needs and how to get access to proper treatment, I've battled the same anxiety and stress many of you have experienced. I had horrible nightmares that always ended with Jacob dying a horrible death, falling off a roof of a building or getting hit by a car, or not receiving a blood transfusion in time. My doctor told me I had a form of PTSD. I believed her, and she helped me understand the difference between a possibility and a probability. A possibility that was something that could happen. Jacob could fall off a roof of a building, you might suppose. But is it probable or likely? No, it's not. By learning to remind myself of this, I was able to take 90% of my things that I worried about and categorize them as a possibility and not a probability, and I have not had nightmares since then. Just as importantly, understanding the difference between possible and likely helped me move forward in my everyday life. These days, Jacob is happy, loving, playful, energetic 12-year-old boy. He loves to hum to music and dance. He has cherished the same toys, his Matchbox cars and Mr. Potato Head and his Play-Doh. I am proud and so lucky and extremely thankful that he has been medically stable for so many years without any complications. When Jacob wants to tell me how much he loves me, he looks into my eyes for a few seconds longer than normal, and it melts my heart. Or when I get an unsolicited hug. The hugs that I don't have to steal from him are always the best. 4 years ago, my life was in turmoil. My heart was broken in a million pieces, and my husband and I had already separated, and we had made the most difficult decisions of our lives to place Jacob into a group home. I was in transition, and my family was in transition. I had been Jacob's primary caregiver since birth, and it was the biggest adventure anyone could ask for. I always thought I had so much to teach him, and as it turns out, he is the one who taught me so much about life, love, courage, and strength. He has been my teacher. I want to share with you the dreadful pain and ultimately the joy of how this process unfolded for me, my ex-husband, and Jacob. Caring for Jacob left me mentally and physically exhausted. My life was in chaos. My home was in chaos. Jacob had developed challenging behaviors that were affecting home, school, and therapies. But as for a caregiver, I needed help that I didn't want to admit. I was doing my very best to care for him, but it was not enough. I was completely and totally overwhelmed. I was exhausted, frustrated, and I was so hyper-vigilant, I didn't want to leave his side for even a second, even to take care of myself. Here is my first message for you today. It is okay to ask for help. Asking for help does not mean you're a failure or not strong enough. It means you're smart enough to see when help is important for your child, yourself, and your family. My help came from my therapist, my friends, and the decision to place Jacob in a group home. My friends helped me survive the hardship and keep my self-esteem intact. I received so much positive support from my PMS families from all over the world. You are
Spend time in the general education classroom, and they will participate in activities such as music, library, PE, maybe recess. Again, the amount of that time, though, will be determined on the students' goals and what would be recommended for their best education, how to use their time most effectively. From there, they transition to middle school. can't emphasize enough that it is assessment-driven, not just customary practice. Where would be the appropriate classroom for the special needs student? The assessment, once again, targets functional skills to drive the development of the IEP. We understand that some of our youngsters need more time. They need to work on those social skills, they need to work on behavior skills, and that will require time away from the general education student in a more specialized setting. This time, maybe when you begin seeing the specialized service providers reducing the amount of services to the individual. Again, this is customary. It may or may not be in the best interest of your child, so I would encourage you that as you have those conversations with the various therapists, ask them on what assessment they're making those recommendations. And it's not too early that some districts will also begin this person-centered planning. That's, at this age, it's an informal way to gain information about your child and what their future might look like beyond school. And Desiree will talk more about that shortly. From there, the student transitions to high school. Transition drives the development of the IEP. At this point, the student's post-secondary goals provide the direction. They will always be teaching academics, but you will see a reduction in that as they begin focusing on that post-secondary goal. The person-centered planning continues. They will typically meet once a year, and at this point, you may be introduced to the district's transition specialist. They are the ones that are responsible for sharing information regarding resources within the community. This could include sharing brochures, websites, and even taking families on tours of the facilities within their community. So if that is not happening, we would encourage you to ask for those, that time with your transition specialist. There are a wide variety of offerings in each community, and they will work to find the best fit for your child and what is best for your family. As a result of those post-secondary goals and looking to their life beyond high school, the student typically begins to spend more time in the community to practice their lifelong skills. We know it takes time and repetition to learn these skills, so they may practice shopping in Kroger. They may practice using a debit card at a restaurant. They will be using more of their education time during the day in the community instead of just on the school's campus per se. So we'll talk a little bit more about person-centered planning now, and Desiree has a lot of experience with that, so I will turn the microphone over to her.
Before talking more about person-centered planning, I wanted to just kind of backtrack where Wendy was focusing on high school and being out in the community. Again, it is if appropriate for the child. Okay, it's always going to depend on that IEP and what they're working towards. In my experience, we have even been able to not only go to whether it is a restaurant, whether it is a grocery store, whether it is a Kohl's department store, but if the future included spending time in a wildlife park or in a garden facility, or even possibly a day program or a pre-vocational program, that also can be part of that student's day. In my experience, we worked for 3 years with a student transitioning to a vocational setting. Staff would also go over as support. It was written into their IEP. So that's the importance. If you can advocate for what that future looks like for your child and how they can support it, that's what you need to know as a parent or as a caregiver or whoever that guardian is for the child, is knowing, you know, this is what the future should look like, and so how can we continue to work on that before they graduate? And what I will share, just to be personal and through experience, is what is heartbreaking and what led to my career change and Wendy's career change as well, is that with this young adult, when after 3 years of working on transitioning to a vocational setting, they denied him. They denied him to attend that setting. And it was heartbreaking. It was extremely heartbreaking. Some reasons being because of the problem behavior, because of the staff, because a lot of times it is a 10-to-1 ratio of they have 10 clients and only 1 adult, because of the funding being so low depending on the states. Some states' funding is better than others. Texas really struggles, and that's where my background has been in Texas. And so we see funding being cut, and we see funding being cut. And because we worked primarily with special ed students, but also some with autism, some that had, nonverbal skills, that we saw that there were very limited opportunities. And Wendy said earlier is that we don't want that. That's not what is best. We want a functional, we want a life for the children to be able to access in the community and to be able to get out of the home. And it's going to look different for each individual. So that actually led to us, when we first started our consulting, when we first started our company or business, we really were going to become advocates for families. We began to sit in what we call in Texas an ARD meeting. All other states call an IEP meeting. So in all of our today's sessions, we'll be addressing it as an IEP. As we sat in those meetings, what we started seeing, like Wendy said, is services being pulled, supports being pulled, and that IEPs were not assessment driven. And so being as an employer, we had to be a team member and support what the majority of the team agreed upon. And so it became very frustrating, as we saw, again, in our experience here in Texas, is those changes were becoming very limited. So our first approach was to advocate, and we still do that through our consulting private services. And then we knew that we were also going to offer camps because they're very limited as well. So that's what started. We just are in the middle of our 4th year of Camp SOAR. However, through that first transition of camp, we started meeting parents and asking parents what their needs were. And what we were finding is that exact population that we typically worked with, that was the population that was struggling more once leaving and truly graduating for post-secondary. So that led us to open up our transition SOAR day program. So just kind of want to talk just a little bit, just to kind of give you a little bit of just some of the experience and the personal part of that. So our hearts are really there for those because, again, we want them to have, the same opportunities. And we realize that not everyone can go to the same day hab or the same group home, but there are opportunities and there should be opportunities. Okay, so now getting back on the person-centered planning. We started doing these meetings later in my career as a behavior specialist, and we call it a PCP. And I really enjoyed these meetings because unlike the IEP, those IEPs can be really, or ARD meetings in Texas can be really stiff, very intimidating and a lot of information. The purpose of a PCP is very different than that. A PCP is more informal. So it's more, we're going to sit back. It's not everything has to be legal. We're really just sitting to share. And even though it's informal, it's an assessment. And it's a great way to gain information about the child. So it is a process-oriented approach. It begins around the age of 14. It can change. It could be closer to 16, but about 14. And the team can include parents, caregivers, teachers, therapists, the child if appropriate. We've even had caregivers, babysitters attend. Anyone who knows the child, if they truly are with that child and know that child, they can be a member of this person-centered planning. The team shares information about the child's interest and strengths, and that's a huge piece because once leaving the educational setting, you want them to be happy. You want the things that they can do to continue to do, and you want them to be happy. And so we really want to emphasize looking at that first when talking about the child. The challenges they may have, whether they may need adaptive equipment. They may need a certain way to communicate. They may be using a device. They may be using sign language. So bringing anything to the table that they need, or reinforcers that they may need, or a special diet that they're currently on, and allergies. So that's important. So that would go on to medical needs. Behavior is a huge piece. And what I know through my 18 years of experience, and its emphasis in behavior, is that, again, and behavior can be both good and bad. You hear the word behavior and everybody thinks it's problematic, but there can be good adaptive behaviors that our kiddos can do. We've got a lot of kids that, at home, they're making their beds, they're vacuuming, they're helping with chores. So we want to share that in that PCP. So behavior being both share those adaptive behaviors, but also talk about those problem behaviors. Because when I started learning more about transition in my field, and I started going to more programs and listening to either the owners or the directors or the specialists, I cannot tell you, well, I can, but I got a little late, so I can't say it's truly my total appropriate 100% data collection. But I cannot tell you, I would tally the number of times I would hear the word behavior, because behavior would keep them from doing so many things, whether it was attending there, whether it was going out when they got on the bus to go do bowling one day. And so what I brought back and shared as a teacher trainer is that, you guys, we have got to be really working at addressing behavior, because all these outside places and agencies are saying that takes precedence over everything. So for them to be able to be here and to function here, we've got to look at behavior. And so I'm a big advocate on making sure that IEP, that there are goals to work on to increase appropriate behaviors, both in the school setting, home setting, and also the community. Let's see. So all of this is to guide, of course, their future planning. The goal is to outline what activities that they'll participate in, possibly the future living arrangements, what that may be. That could be at home, or that could be a group home. That could be with a family member. Education. Are they going to go to further education? Will they go to college? Will they go to a junior college? Will they go to a vocational place or a pre-vocational therapy program? Employment, volunteer work. So really looking at, again, day one after graduation, what that day looks like. PCP meetings, the person-centered planning, they usually occur about every 2 years. It could be more, but typically about every 2 years. The information can be used to develop, and I say should be used to really develop that post-secondary goal in the IEP, because this is the future. This is it. I mean, this is the package. It's like, this is what we want. So we'll talk about that post-secondary goal now, because what happens is with the younger population of students, their IEPs are IEPs. And so their goals and objectives, and as Wendy stated earlier, they could be in academics, they can be in communication, they can be in self-help care, they can be with behavior. A post-secondary goal is an entire different goal. It's the umbrella, an analogy of, it's the umbrella, the foundation that sets all now the other goals and objectives to master that post-secondary goal. Now, this post-secondary goal is going to look different if you think about your kids' IEP goals and objectives being, in the next 36 instructional school weeks, the child will at this percentage. All right? So they're going to state the learner, state the behavior, have the criteria. That's great and legal, but a post-secondary goal is going to look much like could be a run-on with multiple contents of what their future is going to look like. It's basically everything I just discussed in that previous slide. We've got to take all what we want and put that into that post-secondary goal. All right, and so what is it? What is actually what is the definition? Well, the National Secondary Transition Technical Assistance Center defines post-secondary goals to be generally understood to refer to those goals that a child hopes to achieve after leaving secondary school, high school basically, rather than the process of pursuing or moving toward a desired outcome, which is more for an IEP for a younger student. So I like the word that it says that the child also hopes to achieve. And as Wendy had stated, if appropriate, the child can be in the meeting, if appropriate, because we want to know if they're able to tell us, what would you like to do? What would you like to do? What do you see in your future? I've had students, say, let's see, recently, one of them about working with animals. And gardening. We have a client that the place that we rent is at a church facility, and he does weeding for them and landscaping for them and taking the trash out. And I know it sounds labor. He enjoys it, y'all. It is something he enjoys, and he has enjoyed it. I've known him since he was 3. He's 22 now. He comes to my house, and I work with him, even in my home, to work on his landscaping skills. And people are like, he wants to do that? Yeah, he's always loved it. He actually would work in the classroom to go outside and be able to pull weeds as a reinforcer. He loves taking the trash out. He'd take the trash out every day if he could. Now, we'd work on, that's not appropriate either. But again, that's his interest. But now knowing our camper has an interest in animals, we started now talking about what that could look like, for his future. Post-secondary goals, they identify the high school curriculum. That's important because the law does say all of our goals still have to be tied to the curriculum that will prepare the child to meet his or her post-secondary goal. Now, even though it's tied to the curriculum, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be academic. I think a lot of times people think curriculum aligns with just all academics, but that's not true. Again, there's many content areas. Begin no later, like we said, the age of 16 here. Updated annually, they still must legally be measurable based upon transition assessments, and that's important because what I saw not only as a teacher, as a behavior specialist, as a trainer, is that when meeting with staff, they would just make these goals up because that's what they thought would be good. Well, that's not how it works. Or it would be because Johnny had that goal, so Sally should have that goal, right? No, that's not individualized. Or maybe just one night I'm sitting at home and I just pull it out of the sky because I think, hey, this sounds like a good goal we could start working on this year. So Wendy did a real good job of emphasizing assessment, assessment, assessment. Assessment drives everything. And what we're seeing is people say, well, we don't have any transition assessments. Well, you know what? Let's start with a person-centered planning meeting. That would be a great one right there. That's very informal. May include areas of training, education, employment, and independent living skills, and really should. May not include all of those areas for your child, but it should include those areas. And again, the child's interest or the young adult's interest and their preferences, because it is their life. It is their life, and sometimes they're not able to advocate that. And so as a parent or as a caregiver or a guardian, then you are able to be that person to be able to identify what those preferences and interests are. Wendy briefly talked about IDEA, but, law is important. The law has your back, and I would tell teachers that all the time. I mean, you want to be legal. But we also want to be doing what's best practice. And IDEA, the law states that appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessments, I emphasize, related to training, education, and where appropriate, independent living skills. This is where the law comes in and states it about transition. And I don't really think this is emphasized as much as the law that Wendy was talking about previously, is that, IDEA also talks about transition, and there it is right there. So let's move to some examples of post-secondary goals. And again, these are just examples. This is not perfect. I mean, it could be. I mean, it would stand as a legal goal, and it does look very different than a younger student's IEP. So after graduation, Johnny would participate in a day program desired to provide vocational training. So there's always still going to be a target behavior. When I say behavior, I just mean what they're doing, what action that they're doing. That's going to be stated. And usually where they're going to be and what location. After high school, Johnny will improve his social and self-care skills by attending instruction at a center-based adult program. Because some people are not aware that, and it's just that lack of knowledge, that you can state, a group home. You can state day hab or a pre-voc center in that goal. If that really is the goal that we're working on, then that's what we should. And maybe it's not like my example earlier of taking that student, to that location. Maybe that isn't appropriate, but why can't we as teachers or as parents or members of their team go and see these facilities, and then where they are currently in their school environment, let's replicate. Let's teach them how to sit and do this social group that they do in the morning. Let's replicate how they do their cooking and their heating and their microwave. Let's start making our program look like that instead of just a typical classroom. And then upon completion of high school, Johnny will enroll in courses at Tarrant County College. And just this is an important note that the older the student, young adult gets, it becomes increasing, this post-secondary goal gets more specific as the time gets closer for them leaving school, because it should be updated, it should be changed. It should be revised. What was stated at 14 for Johnny or what was stated at 16 for Johnny is more than likely not going to be the same at 20. And it should be revised and it should be updated. But closer to that transition where it's going to be day one post school, it should look like their first day of life after they leave. So a little bit about employment. Post-secondary, competitive employment, which is work in the competitive labor market that is performed on a full-time or part-time basis in an integrated setting. There's also supported employment, and that's competitive work in an integrated work setting or employment in integrated work settings. A lot of students that during my career in public school, they had more severe needs, the population. I've worked with a variety, but emphasized on those who needed more support. So when we were going out and we were working, they needed someone with them, whether it was a safety concern, whether they needed the prompts to complete the task. And so if that's the case, and we know that, we may even specify that in that post-secondary goal, is that with supports. Okay, or maybe they're going to volunteer somewhere. I mean, it's not employment, so that's why it's not on the slide. But volunteering is also an option, and we have a lot of kids who volunteer, and they totally enjoy it. It's fun for them. We have the client that likes to pull weeds. He is already volunteering because he did graduate. So his caregiver takes him before he comes to my program in the afternoon. They go out and they have a routine where he's going and volunteering in the community. And it's great because it's keeping him busy. It's keeping him busy because his life has been school. His life has been a schedule. So now they're able to keep a schedule. It just looks different. And he's getting out in the community. Moving on. Some living options, and these are just a few, but it could be independent living, living on their own in an apartment or with a friend or with a family member. Possibly could be supported living with help, a group home, already talked about a sibling and or a family member. But really also that can be a part of that post-secondary goal, is to know where are they going to be? Where are they going to live? And that could change. That could change. How are we on time, Veronica? We're right there. Looky there. All right. So, hey, I got lucky today. Resources. Here are just a few. So but what I do want to point out is that each school district belongs to a region. So like you'll hear like a region center, a service center. Find out, if you don't already know, your region center for supports, trainings, and additional information. A lot of those should be free for you to attend. Also, just finding, if there's families that have, experience that they've already gone through and you can talk to them, they are a great resource. I mean, I had a parent, through her guardianship, she helped so many other people learn how to do guardianship for their child because it was such a long process, but she became a great resource. So, yeah, snap a pic if you need to or write it down. Is everybody good? All right. And for any additional information, this is our website, noetconsulting.com. I'd encourage you to go on and read all about us. We recently had it even updated, and so we've got some parent testimonials and some new pictures to show what our program looks like and what we offer, because there may be a way that we could help you. And that will conclude. Yeah.
So we have about 10 more minutes, so we'll have open Q&A if anybody has any questions. But the next bus with the 13 and older field trip participants will be arriving about 2:35. So if you do have a child with that, they'll be arriving over where the conference store exit is at. Any questions? Oh, take your microphone. You'll be able to answer her.
Hi, my name is Cynthia. And I have a 15-year-old PMS child who's higher functioning, and we struggle with IEPs because goals are typically, standards are up here and capabilities are down here. Our district has done a good job of sectioning out kids with disabilities and putting them in a different school when we really have the right to the public education, so we've kind of pushed them towards keeping her in the district. So we've gotten to a point where she's the only child, and now we're teaching them for the children coming up behind her.
Wow.
But my question is how do you get them to understand the right goals for somebody without having how do you lower expectations?
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, they're writing goals that are more advanced.
Right, because their typical kids are not lower functioning.
So everybody kind of gets these same, like I kind of said, goals sometimes, and they're not more individualized, like for your child. Do they share what assessment tool they use, what data they use to get that goal? Are they sharing that with you?
Yes.
Okay. So the goal itself should be based on the assessment. I get the curriculum is a piece of it, but it should also be modified. Also, what might be a possibility to help would be looking, when Wendy talked about the FIE, the full individual assessment and evaluation, because that includes a lot of where they are cognitively and their abilities and strengths and weaknesses that should be looked at, as well as developing those goals. Another, what I'd question is, if the goals are written here, what does progress look like as they're reporting on a grading system?
The goals are not written up here. The goals are written down here. The expectations are up here.
Okay.
So we're constantly not working towards the goals.
Here, let Wendy speak up here.
Like, we struggle with having that conversation all the time because we have expectations that are up here, but our goals are here.
Gotcha.
So my thought and question might be, the approach that is encouraged is, are they teaching and working on scaffolding skills to get to that grade level expectation?
No.
For example, well, that's what the focus should be. For example, typical 10th grader might be enrolled in geometry. Well, often our clients are not ready for that, but a prerequisite skill for that might be understanding shapes. Have they learned this is a ball, this is a square, this is a triangle? So what the school needs to do is understand where they are if they're not ready for grade level. Is it the previous year? Is it, and work their way. They all should be aligning towards that grade level. So we don't want it too low, but they may not be at the grade level. So are they focusing on those prerequisite skills in the right channel? That's where they should focus.
And also, a big thing that teachers typically forget and staff forget is that the child is a general ed student first. They're not a special ed student first. Everyone is a general ed student first. So I applaud you on being that advocate, because they should not be discriminated and isolated, and that shouldn't be. So I think it's more looking at also developing possibly a portfolio showing what her capabilities and abilities are. We've even had some parents even video. Look, this is what they're doing. This is what my kid is doing at the grocery store. This is what my kid is doing at home. This is what my kid is working on academically. And so videos can be a great way of sharing that too. So again, it's just, I think, gathering that information of these are the strengths. This isn't okay, that we're not okay with this. What did you say our age is again?
15.
Okay, so do you have a post-secondary goal yet?
I was laughing. I asked her, I'm like, what did she say you were supposed to have that at? What age? Because we don't.
And so that's where y'all need to come and have another meeting.
Yeah.
and
it was interesting when you were talking about the work transition goals. Like, we've struggled with the school wanting to do shredding.
Right.
Do you like shredding? No. So she
my daughter doesn't either, but she has guinea pigs, so it just is her chore. But
so she tries to advocate for herself.
Sure,
And
should.
She does that,
good for you.
They reinforce those same things, like, this is what we're going to do today, and then she's already said no, but I don't want to do that, and they're not figuring out why she doesn't want to do it.
Yeah. I think a lot of times classrooms become set up just like this, is like you just said, this is what we do.
Yeah.
This is what we've done for 10 years, 20 years. This is what we do. And it's like, that doesn't work. And again, one shoe fitting all, it's not individualized anyway. So I think it's just going to be more communication. I mean, that's one of the things as an advocate I'll say is that it's communication, 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 communication. And you just sometimes it's a beat down on both ends, but that's the only way. Just keep advocating, keep communicating, and keep trying to make those changes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was curious about the transition assessments. Are there specific assessments that you use, or what? Can you give me some names?
Yeah, absolutely. One that we encourage and what we use, I don't know if y'all are familiar, but prior to this assessment I'm going to name, ABLES, Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills by Dr. Sundberg and Partington. That is a great tool for the early year planning, but as students get older, and I even say to teachers and staff I'm talking like 5th grade, 6th grade, that you start looking, because Wendy talked about the functional skills and the work skills and the more appropriate independent living skills. So the assessment of functional living skills is called the AFLS, AFLS. And that is I referred to Dr. Partington with the other assessment. He does this assessment as well. And it is a phenomenal tool. We use this in my business to develop goals and objectives that we work on with our clients. Now, there are more informal ones. Do you have a current transition specialist?
I don't think so.
No. I would ask, because some districts do and some districts don't. And so if there's, but, It's a fairly new assessment? Oh, no, I was talking about a transition specialist in general as a person. Because if there's not a transition specialist, there should be someone who is under that, area that should be giving that information to teachers and helping. And then also you can look at some examples of when I referenced the PCP, person-centered planning. You can look at what those look like online as well. And that's a very simple, like I said, informal assessment. And that was a good one.
And then the transition specialist should be hired by the school district, right? Not by the parent.
It can be both.
Okay.
I recently, and Wendy recently, through our consulting services in the home setting, we were working on with a private transition specialist that the parent had hired because of their disappointment with the school setting, and so the parent hired their own. The school district didn't pay for it, the parent paid for it, and then the school was required when going back to the IEP/ARD meeting to allow this person to come in and observe and gather information to help the parents. And then because we were doing home training with the client in the home and parent training, she contacted us as well. And she used our informal information and we had done formal assessment as well to get the school to have a better transition plan. I don't even think she actually had one at all when I really think back. I think there wasn't anything. And I grew up in a small town, and so my best friend, she's a school psychologist there in Sulphur Springs, Texas, and she shared with me, she's the transition specialist as well, because they don't have one. So she actually takes the kids out in the community and does job training and coaching.
This pretty much piggybacks what you were talking about. So my daughter is 14. She'll be going into 8th grade, and she's also up for her 3-year eval. Yes. So in 8th grade, we'll be going through that 3-year eval where you have PT, OT, speech. You go through the whole process. So you mentioned transition.
Yes.
My daughter goes to a really small charter school, so we're going to be moving back. We were public school charter. Now we have to revisit what high school will look like. Our smaller charter school probably doesn't have the same resources. So as we go through this really big eval process as we're getting ready for the transition, is there anything besides like a transition assessment that we need to consider that they might not even know about, that I don't even know about we might need?
I would bring up what I said about the assessment of functional living skills, that AFLS assessment.
Okay.
That's really great in looking at, and it does everything. Community participation, it does vocational. I mean, each has its own test. You don't even have to do the entire assessment. You can really target school environment, community environment, work. So it's a really great tool.
The next session is going to start at 2:45, and it's going to be the individual education plan for all ages.
All ages.
So we can continue with Q&A, or if you need to get to another session, if you don't want to stay for this one or go to another one. But if anybody has any other questions for
So I know that services and programs vary from state to state, what's available, funding, all of that. But anecdotally, and if you have information in other states, I'm from Georgia.
Okay.
How hard is it to find a program after school is over that will accept a child who is not toilet trained still?
In honesty, with my Texas experience, very difficult, and that's what parents were finding, and it was very false leading, because they would say that there was a zero denial turn down for places, but then they would have this list of expectations, like you need to work the microwave, you need to be toilet trained, you need to be able to get on and off, the bus or the shuttle, and all of these things. And so it was like, wait a minute, this isn't really aligning. So there are some. It's that, do they have the staff, and do they have the materials and facility, the supplies, if it's adaptive equipment they need, the space that they need. But yeah, we see it's very limited, that.
Yeah, and that's a big, our kids function at all different levels,
Yeah.
but a lot of our kids even by the time they leave high school, are not toilet trained.
Yeah, yeah, and I just, again, this is in my experience, but yeah, I saw that as well, is that they were listing that out, and that was primarily a huge obstacle for even, again, the population that we were working with too. So I would just
for summer camps too. I mean,
True.
it's just in general, they want the higher functioning kids. It's,
right, and
Yeah.
that's one thing about what we do is so unique, is because the clients that we have in our program, they're not going to be in other programs either. And so we're very small, but, maybe there's somebody that you could start talking to and encouraging, because I know there's another day habilitation locally here in where we are, and parents started saying, this is geared to high functioning. This is all high functioning. And it's taken several years, but now they are working on doing another program. So maybe it's, gathering with some people and talking and going and observing and seeing these, services that are out there and having these conversations about, making changes and
well, my child's 13, but I mean, I'm already experiencing that when he gets out of school for summer.
Right.
It's for 10 or 11 weeks, and I work, and so it's a challenge to find the appropriate program for him.
right.
Yeah. Wrap it up.
Turn the mic off. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good afternoon.